In 1972, Kawasaki built a motorcycle that was faster than anything most riders had ever experienced. It had a two-stroke triple engine that screamed like a chainsaw and hit so hard at mid-RPM that the front wheel left the ground without warning. The frame was made of steel tubing so thin that it flexed visibly under hard acceleration. The front brake was a single disc that felt more like a suggestion than a command. And the rear drum brake was about as useful as dragging your boot on the pavement. Riders bought it anyway. Thousands of them. And a significant number of those riders ended up in hospitals, insurance claims, and obituaries. The motorcycle was the Kawasaki H2 750 Mach 4. The riding community gave it a different name. They called it the Widowmaker. This is the story of a motorcycle so dangerous that it changed how the entire industry thought about the relationship between power and the machine delivering it. And the strangest part of this story is that 50 years later, riders are still fighting to own one. The early 1970s were a different time in motorcycling. The Japanese manufacturers were locked in a horsepower war that made the modern motorcycle industry look cautious by comparison. Honda had dropped the CB750 in 1969, and the entire industry scrambled to respond. Yamaha pushed performance with two-stroke twins. Suzuki developed the GT series, and Kawasaki, the smallest of the big four Japanese manufacturers, decided that the way to make a name for themselves was to build the fastest production motorcycle on the planet. The engineers at Kawasaki's Akashi factory settled on a two-stroke triple, 3 cylinders, two-stroke combustion, 748 cc of displacement, and every design decision pointed at one goal: maximum power, not balance, not handling, not rider safety, power. The result was an engine that produced 74 horsepower at the crankshaft. In 1972, that was a staggering number for a production motorcycle. For context, a Honda CB750 produced around 67 horsepower from a 4-stroke inline 4 that was considered frighteningly fast by the standards of the era. The H2 beat it on raw output, and did so with a 2-stroke power delivery that no 4-stroke could match for sheer violence. 2-stroke engines do not deliver power the way 4-strokes do. A 4-stroke builds its power gradually as the RPMs climb, giving the rider time to feel the acceleration building and adjust accordingly. A 2-stroke, particularly a tuned 2-stroke triple, stores its energy in the lower RPM range and then unleashes it in a narrow power band that hits like someone flipped a switch. There is no gradual buildup. There is no warning. One moment the engine is buzzing along like an oversized lawnmower, and the next moment you are holding onto a machine that is trying to rip the handlebars out of your hands. On the H2, the engine was relatively docile, below 5,000 RPMs manageable. Almost boring. Then the expansion chambers started working in harmony, the ports aligned, and the engine came alive with a surge of acceleration that was genuinely terrifying. Riders who experienced it for the first time described the feeling as violent. The rear tire would break traction. The front wheel would lift. And all of this happened in the space of a single heartbeat. The problem was everything attached to that engine. The frame was a simple, mild steel tube construction that Kawasaki designed to a budget. It was adequate for a motorcycle making 50 horsepower. It was not adequate for a motorcycle making 74 horsepower with a 2-stroke hit that arrived like a punch. Under hard acceleration, the frame flexed enough that riders could feel the geometry changing mid-corner. The steering head would go light. The rear end would squat and shift the weight balance forward during deceleration, then suddenly transfer rearward under throttle. The bike was constantly moving underneath the rider in ways that a rigid, well-designed chassis would never allow. The wheelbase was short, the weight distribution favored the rear, And the swing arm, the component connecting the rear wheel to the frame, was made of pressed steel that twisted under load. At highway speeds, the combination of frame flex, swing arm twist, and the two-stroke power band could produce tank slappers, violent oscillations of the handlebars that no amount of rider strength could control. And the brakes, a single hydraulic disc on the front wheel and a drum brake on the rear. For a motorcycle capable of quarter-mile times under 13 seconds and top speeds approaching 120 miles per hour, the stopping equipment was criminally inadequate. Riders described the front brake as having about a half-second delay between squeezing the lever and feeling any retardation. By the time the single disc grabbed, the corner was much closer than it had been a moment ago. If you are finding this helpful, hit subscribe. We cover motorcycle history and culture every week. The crash record told the story that the spec sheet did not. Insurance companies in the United States and the United Kingdom started flagging the H2 750 within the first year of production. Premiums for H2 owners climbed sharply as claims data came in. Single vehicle accidents, the kind where the rider simply lost control without any other vehicle being involved, were disproportionately high for the H2 compared to other motorcycles in the same displacement class. The riding community started calling it the Widowmaker, not as a term of derision, but as a statement of fact. The motorcycle was fast enough to thrill anyone brave enough to twist the throttle past 5,000 RPM. It was also unstable enough to punish any rider who was not prepared for what happened next. A significant portion of the problem was the buyer. The H2 750 was the fastest production motorcycle you could buy in the early 1970s, and that attracted riders whose ambition exceeded their skill. Young riders with limited experience bought the H2 because it was the quickest thing on the road. They discovered the power band for the first time at the worst possible moment, in a corner, in traffic, or on a road surface that could not handle the rear tire breaking loose under the surge of two-stroke power. Experienced riders who understood the H2's personality learned to manage it. They stayed on top of the power band rather than being surprised by it. They anticipated the frame flex and adjusted their riding style accordingly. They upgraded the brakes with aftermarket dual disc conversions and stiffened the suspension with better shocks and fork springs. They treated the motorcycle like the wild animal it was, respecting its limits while exploiting its strengths. In the hands of a rider who respected its dangers, the H2 was one of the most exhilarating machines ever built. The acceleration was unlike anything a four-stroke could deliver. The surge of a two-stroke power band has a visceral quality that four-stroke riders never experience, a sense that the engine is not just producing power, but detonating it. The sound of the two-stroke triple at full song, a high-pitched wail mixed with the bark of the expansion chambers, was addictive in a way that is difficult to explain to someone who has never heard it. It smelled like burned castor oil. It left a blue haze behind it. And when you nailed the throttle on a straight stretch of empty road and felt the front wheel hover above the asphalt, you understood why people kept buying the thing despite everything they had heard. But the Kawasaki H2 was not the only motorcycle of its era with a reputation for violence. The Yamaha RD350 and RD400 two-stroke twins earned their own notoriety as lightweight machines with disproportionate power that could overwhelm inexperienced riders in an instant. The RD350 in particular became a favorite of riders who wanted sport bike performance on a budget, and the crash statistics reflected the gap between the engine's capability and the chassis's composure. The Suzuki GT750, nicknamed the Water Buffalo, took a different approach to danger. It was heavy, with a water-cooled two-stroke triple that made respectable power, but was wrapped in a chassis that weighed over 500 pounds wet. The danger came not from explosive acceleration, but from the difficulty of managing that weight in corners and under braking. A GT750 entering a decreasing radius curve too fast was an exercise in physics that the rider usually lost. Decades later, the speed war produced a different kind of dangerous motorcycle. The Kawasaki ZX-12R and the Suzuki Hayabusa pushed top speeds past 185 miles per hour in the late 1990s, prompting European regulators to threaten mandatory speed limiters. The Japanese manufacturers agreed to a gentleman's agreement capping top speed at 186 miles per hour. Not because the motorcycles could not go faster, but because the public relations consequences of production motorcycles exceeding 200 miles per hour were unacceptable. Kawasaki eventually killed the H2 two-stroke in the mid-1970s. Emissions regulations were tightening worldwide, and two-stroke engines, which burn oil as part of their combustion cycle, could not meet the new standards. The Environmental Protection Agency in the United States and equivalent bodies in Europe made it clear that the era of unburned hydrocarbons trailing behind a motorcycle like a smoke signal was over. Kawasaki pivoted to the Z1 900, a four-stroke inline-four that was faster in a straight line than the H2 and dramatically more civilized to ride. The Z1 had a proper double cradle frame, better brakes, smoother power delivery, and none of the terrifying mid-range hit that defined the H2 experience. The Z1 became a legend in its own right, but it never carried the same visceral, terrifying reputation as the two-stroke triple it replaced. The Z1 was respected. The H2 was feared. Those are fundamentally different kinds of legend. The end of the two-stroke era closed the door on a specific kind of motorcycle danger, the kind that came not from excessive top speed or extreme power numbers, but from the combination of a savage power band and a chassis that could not contain it. Modern motorcycles are incomparably faster than the H2 750 in every measurable way, but they are also incomparably safer because the technology has advanced on every front simultaneously. A new rider can buy a 200-horsepower superbike today and ride it home from the dealer without incident because the electronics are managing the engine output, the braking force, and the traction in ways that the H2 rider never had. Traction control intervenes before the rear tire breaks loose. ABS prevents front wheel lockup under panic braking. Wheelie control keeps the front wheel on the ground when the throttle opens too aggressively. Cornering ABS adjusts for lean angle. The modern superbike is trying to keep you alive even when your inputs are trying to get you killed. The H2 750 did the opposite. It amplified every mistake and punished every lapse in judgment with immediate physical consequences. But the H2 750 refuses to fade. If anything, its reputation has grown stronger with every passing decade. Restored examples sell at auction for $15,000 to $30,000, depending on condition, with Concours quality machines pushing even higher. Original, unrestored survivors with documented history command premiums that would have seemed insane to the riders who bought them new for under $2,000 in 1972. The restoration community around the H2 is dedicated and global. Specialists in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Japan rebuild these engines to original specifications using new old stock parts and precision-machined reproductions, finding a good set of original expansion chambers, the exhaust pipes that give the H2 its distinctive sound and power band character, is one of the biggest challenges and expenses in a restoration. A complete set of original H2 pipes in good condition can cost more than the motorcycle itself sold for new. Collectors want them because they represent something the modern motorcycle industry has deliberately engineered out of existence. Raw, unfiltered, unmanaged mechanical violence packaged in a motorcycle that could be purchased by anyone with a license and a down payment. The modern Kawasaki H2, the supercharged four-stroke inline-four that carries the same name, is a nod to the original's spirit. It is brutally fast. It makes over 200 horsepower, but it also has traction control, cornering ABS, electronic suspension, and a chassis designed by engineers who used finite element analysis to ensure the frame would never flex the way the originals did. The modern H2 is a controlled explosion. The original H2 was an uncontrolled one, and that is exactly why riders still want the original. Not because it is faster than what you can buy today. It is not even close. A modern Yamaha MT-07 would leave an H2 750 behind in a canyon. A Honda CBR 600RR would embarrass it on a track. The H2 is not fast by modern standards. It is dangerous by any standard, and that is the appeal. They want it because it represents a time when motorcycle manufacturers would build something genuinely dangerous and let the riders sort out the consequences. There were no electronic safety nets, no nannies, no software standing between the throttle and the rear tire. Just a two-stroke triple, a questionable frame, and however much courage you brought to the ride. Whether that ERA should be mourned or celebrated is a question every rider answers differently. The families of riders who died on H2 750S have one answer. The collectors who keep them polished in climate-controlled garages have another. And the riders who still throw a leg over a restored Widowmaker on a Sunday morning and twist the throttle past 5,000 RPM have the answer that matters most to them. The Kawasaki H2 750 was not built to be safe. It was built to be the fastest. And the price of that ambition was paid by the riders who discovered, sometimes too late, that speed without stability is just a faster way to get into trouble. If you have ever ridden a two-stroke triple, drop a comment and tell me what it felt like. And if you own an H2 750, I want to see it.